I think there's a lot of room in architecture firms for all different sorts of individuals, but it takes a customized approach to finding each person's path, finding where they fit in best, and then being really personalized in terms of the training that you give them.
Hello from the AIA North Carolina Center for Architecture and Design, and welcome to this episode of Talking to the Wall, presented by Think Strategy. Talking to the Wall is a series of vlog episodes in which we answer questions that nobody wants to answer or nobody seems to want to talk about. My name is Walt Teague. I was a practicing architect for 33 years, and now I'm creative director for Think Strategy. Our topic for this episode of Talking to the Wall is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we have an outstanding individual here to talk to us on this topic, Melanie Reddrick. Melanie is an architect. She's a studio principal with Little, working out of Charlotte. She is 2023 Treasurer of AIA North Carolina, and we are honored to have you with us today.
Happy to be here.
Outstanding. So, our question related to DEI is, how can design firms most effectively improve diversity, equity, and inclusion? And there is so much discussion within the design and construction industry about this topic.
Yes.
So let's get into answering or talking about this by, first of all, breaking down the overall question of diversity, equity, inclusion. Let's talk about each one individually.
All
Diversity first. How do we best address diversity?
So architecture is a very unusual profession in terms of just the numbers. So as a Black female architect, I know that there are, it's less than half of 1% of licensed architects are Black females. So it is a problem. But I think that the profession is being very proactive right now in terms of rectifying it. And I think it starts with recruitment. It starts with the pipeline of recruitment, because as we go to schools and we talk with people, we need to make sure that the schools are diverse first. So a lot of things that architects can do, we have things called project pipeline that we can get involved in, ACE mentor program, architecture in the classroom. These are all programs where architects can get in front of young people, and being really careful to get in front of groups of people that they may not have met an architect before.
Yes.
And that could be their first indication that, hey, this is a possible career path for me. So I think it starts with the pipeline and then goes into recruitment.
Yeah. So that's diversity. Let's talk about equity. And there's a huge difference in equity and equality. So how does that apply to this question?
That's a great question. So when I think about the difference between equity and equality, I think about, in architecture firms, we have those lunch and learns, right?
Yeah.
So I would say equality is if you order 20 box lunches with turkey and cheese and fruit and cookie, and everybody gets the same lunch. That's equality. Equity actually involves listening to the individuals in terms of what they actually want. So equity would be, hey, we're making a group order, so go ahead and tell us what you want. So I think when it comes to equality and equity, there's automatically going to be a factor of listening in there, because equality is when you give everyone what you think they should have. Equity is when you give each individual what they need.
So what are some proactive things that firms can do to address equity?
You know, I think when it comes to training, when you bring staff on, sometimes the training is one size fits all. We think that everyone has a certain basic skill set, and we build upon that. And then if we see deficits in any of those areas, we think, well, this person isn't architect that's not a future architect, maybe, maybe not. I think that when you're looking at training, try to customize the training to the individual and their background and their interests. I think there's a lot of room in architecture firms for all different sorts of individuals, but it takes a customized approach to finding each person's path, finding where they fit in best, and then being really personalized in terms of the training that you give them.
And that's a great distinction from diversity, what we were just talking about. So now that we've talked about diversity and equity, let's talk about inclusion.
Inclusion. So I have a daughter who's 11 years old, and she is on the autism spectrum. So she goes to a great school, and it's a really small classroom, and she will sit at the table at lunch with all the other girls. She's at the table with them, but she feels lonely. And the reason she feels lonely is because she doesn't feel included in what they're talking about. In her particular case, she doesn't feel included because maybe what they're talking about, she might not understand their body language or the tone of their voice. So it's almost like she's in a different culture than they are. She has different interests. So getting someone to the table isn't enough to make them feel included. You also have to make sure that they are a part of the conversation, and sometimes you may have to modify or modulate the conversation in order to include them.
This has been very insightful and very helpful in understanding what those differences are, because too often we lump DEI together, and they're very distinct differences.
Absolutely.
And how the firms can address those. So what are some of the benefits firms can realize from inclusion, equity, and diversity?
You know, when I think about the benefits that firms can get from kind of an inclusive process, I think about some of the other processes that we've adopted that have really helped our way of working. So I think about drawing by hand versus drawing in AutoCAD versus using building information modeling. You have a situation where one person is in the drawing. You have a situation where one person might be in the file, but you can link the files together, versus building information modeling. Everybody's in the same project working simultaneously, and we find that that helps us to be more productive. I think about the process of working with contractors. It used to be when we did our drawings, we thought about, I wonder what the contractor would think about this, and we try to design with them in mind. Versus now, a lot of times we'll bring the construction manager on early, and they're actually part of that process. So I would just say, in the natural evolution of architectural practice, we found that that collaboration helps us have a better product. And when you're designing for the public, I believe that the collaboration of different viewpoints that represent that public will help us come up with a better product.
Excellent, excellent. So what are ways for firms and companies or other companies to foster inclusive and diverse workplaces?
You know, one thing I haven't mentioned before would be when we think about how we recruit and we think about our job postings. So a lot of times we say, okay, you need a master's in architecture to do this position, this position, this position, and this position. Do we really? So I would say, especially in large architecture firms, there are so many different roles, so many different ways that people can contribute. So being a little bit creative in terms of A, where we go to find our staff, and B, you know, creating ways for different types of people to contribute. Not everyone needs to be a principal, not everyone needs to be a project architect, but we have sustainability specialists, we have specification writers, we have project facilitators. There are so many different roles, and I think as architecture firms, you know, we're definitely looking at a diverse group of colleges and universities in terms of where we recruit, but also thinking about making sure that that goes across the whole company, and that can give us some creative options in terms of recruiting a more diverse workforce.
So I think you're leading into my next question. So how does the future look like? What does the future look like for DEI?
You know, I'm hopeful that it will become kind of an obsolete term because it'll be so ingrained
Yes.
in the culture that it just won't even be necessary. So
Excellent. There's a lot of resources on this topic. Are there specific resources that maybe you'd like to cite, or?
I would say that NC NOMA is a wonderful resource for anyone that's interested in really furthering this conversation. And I will say that, again, in the spirit of inclusion, that NC NOMA is an organization that would welcome the collaboration and the discussion. So I say no matter what, where people find themselves on the demographic spectrum, I think that that potential collaboration could be really helpful.
We have a number of links that are posted here that you can go to find out more about what's happening in the design and construction world relative to DEI. So let's go back to the original question then. We're going to wrap things up, Melanie.
Sure.
And that original question was, how can design firms most effectively improve diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Excellent.
What's a good short answer for that? That's what we're here for.
Absolutely. I would say the short answer is be involved in terms of growing the pipeline, be creative in terms of your recruiting practices, and be inclusive in terms of the way that you structure your workplace, your training, and your activities.
All good advice. This has been very insightful and very helpful. Thank you very much, Melanie, for being here.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Certainly. So thank you all for attending this episode of Talking to the Wall. Talking to the Wall, again, is presented by Think Strategy. Think Strategy is a business entity here in North Carolina, but works throughout the United States, providing business strategic planning for the design and construction professions. We work hard to help them grow, perform, and transition their ownerships. Thank you very much.
Thank you.